Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at this exciting new webinar, where we're going to be exploring the innovative and fascinating world of neurotechnology. I'm Julia Charlton. I'm the chair of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here in Hong Kong today, and I'm delighted to kick this event off. When I first started reading about neurotechnology, it was interesting to know that one of the focal points in the field was the development of brain-machine interfaces, BMI, and the creation of neural prosthetics to help to treat conditions and in some cases even completely restore cognitive functions that may have been lost, which is why it's no surprise that the market for neurotechnology is growing at a staggering compound annual growth rate of 12%, and it's expected to be a $21 billion industry by 2026. Coupling this with the rapid advancement and breakthroughs in artificial intelligence that are now becoming more and more intertwined with the neurotech industry. So the near future is shaping up to becoming something straight out of what would have been our imagination 20 years ago. Today, we're joined by one company that's part of the companies that are making all of this happen. NURO CORP brings together massive expertise and progressive vision on applied neuroscience, computing, and biotech for the benefit and advancement of mankind. NURO is the manufacturer of the NUOS platform, a zero-surgery multimodal neural operating system that helps incapacitated individuals communicate with loved ones and caregivers via neurological signals, thoughts, and simple-to-use tools. So we're extremely honored today to be joined by the founder and CEO of NURO CORP, Francois Gand. Francois has over 30 years of experience as a seasoned entrepreneur. He's the founder of 5 award-winning tech firms and thousands of big data projects. He's currently based in Canada, a Commonwealth country, but originally from France. Francois spent his childhood in the beautiful French Alps and then went on to study in Massachusetts and in Florida. Francois, it's really lovely to have you here with us today, and thank you so much. I know you're going to give us a presentation to find out all about the amazing things NURO CORP has been doing. And after that, you and I will deep dive into a conversation about all these amazing products and their possibilities for the future. And we'll also look at whether the audience has submitted any questions, which we'll try and deal with. So before that, I just quickly like to remind anybody tuning in that the webinar will roughly last for about an hour. So without anything more from me, Francois, over to you.
Julia, thank you so much. It's really truly a pleasure to be here today and stream this to 56 countries. It's as you said, although I'm French, I have actually lived in quite a few countries of the Commonwealth, and it's an honor to be able to talk to yourself and all of you in all of those countries. I am in the Waterloo region of Ontario, Canada, at this time, and without further ado, I'm going to maybe share a short presentation with you to give you a little bit of background and tell you about what we've achieved so far. And then I'll be glad to answer any questions and discuss any topics with you, Julia. Thank you so much. So we'll start with again a brief intro in terms of what NURO has done and what we've been working on more recently. One of the aspects of our company is that we have at this moment 2 non-invasive neurotechnologies. Most people know us for a product or set of product called NUOS, but we also have announced quite recently another technology called the pad. So NUOS and the pad, so to speak, are 2 different items, but there are some similarities. They are both non-invasive technologies. They are both multimodal, which means that we acquire different type of signals from the human brain. They are pain-free and surgery-free. They are both patented or in patent pending in various jurisdictions. And they are an architecture, if you wish, that have 4 layers of technology. There is a hardware layer, a software layer, an algorithmic layer, and artificial intelligence deep learning layer, all working together, so to speak, to give us some very interesting insights and capabilities from the human brain. The PAD is oriented towards neurodegenerative disease or disorders such as Alzheimer's. NUOS is oriented towards the communication and computing by brain instantaneously and without any surgery of any kind. I will start really quickly on the PAD. As you can see, the PAD is a wireless helmet form factor. It is targeting at its first iteration over 60 million people across the world today. The World Health Organization is looking at about an additional 10 million new cases of Alzheimer's per year. So this is not a small problem. We're really going after something that could potentially become the next pandemic, if you wish. And from all the people I've talked to, they know that it's going to be overwhelming the healthcare systems across the world. Ultimately, the human population is aging. We're living, also in conditions that, in some ways, promote this type of problems. We haven't found yet, the magic pill to resolve Alzheimer's or dementia, and this is really for the early detection and I would say the continuous monitoring of this type of problems. In a lot of places around the world, including in the Commonwealth, you may have access to, let's say, an fMRI where you live, but in some countries that is not the case, and that's a big problem. If you are not able, to start tracking what's happening in your brain. On the other side, the big pharma have started their therapy to slow down the progress of those disorders or those diseases. And the idea is obviously trying to understand how the therapies are affecting the brain. So having a device like this accelerates, if you wish, the collection of data, which can be really important for researchers, can be extremely important for regulatory bodies. It's quite promising. We've received multiple patents for it, and we're quite excited about this particular technology. Fundamentally, there's 4 key targets across this new neurotechnology. It is once again for the detection and monitoring of the Alzheimer's disease and other neurological states. It utilizes multimodality, and both in the sensors and in the signal processing. It's using different types of AI actually to process that particular data. And it's using also a wireless, portable wireless helmet form factor. In terms of NUOS, NUOS is now in its 2nd generation. We, as a startup originally, we've gone through 8 accelerators in Canada and in California and Silicon Valley. 9 years of research and development. We are, as per the FDA, the only non-invasive technology and treatment of its kind up to stage 6 ALS. So very, very advanced locked-in state. We now have a full product line, so we have different editions of NUOS, and we've done over 100 implementation of our systems, from pediatric care to rehabilitation to critical care to stroke management, all the way to palliative care, and we've done so in multiple countries across the world, which makes us one of the global leaders in that regard. Fundamentally, we've hit 100% success across different pathophysiologies. So from different kinds of stroke, for instance, more recently, we've been able to actually interact with juvenile and adult patients who clinically were deemed to be non-cognitive. So this is actually a very important development. I've not announced it yet publicly. It's something that we're very keen to promote in some ways. Complex trauma, so different types of traumatic brain injury or traumatic spinal cord injuries, as well as different states or stages of neurodegenerative disease such as ALS, multiple sclerosis, and others. We've also done more recently some really interesting work in terms of intractable epilepsy, autism, and other conditions that sometimes are undiagnosed, especially when you deal with children or teenagers. A lot of people want to know how it works. So classically, Neurotechnology has really been looking at the motor cortex. On our side, we decided to go another way. We're working from the frontal part of the human head, so the prefrontal cortex primarily, and we don't need a lot of the signals that other technologies do require. On our end, obviously, we don't need any voice, we don't need any touch. No facial movement, no eye movement, no muscular control, no vision required even. So we have some patients that have lost visions or are extremely vision impaired, so you can still use our systems. No line of sight required, so the technology doesn't require to be located in front of it, so to speak. And we don't require any type of external stimuli, which is also a classic neurotech approach, I would say. So there's no flashing, there's no training, there's no calibration per se that's required, that you are indoor or even outdoor. There's no camera tracking involved. So your body, your appearance, your face, none of that is being filmed. And obviously a huge differentiator is that there is no brain surgery at all. There's no insertion of a foreign body, no removal or replacement. So obviously a lot less risk. No infection or other bigger problems that can happen from a surgical procedure. In terms of the IP side of it, the NUOS technology is also patented or patent pending in various jurisdictions across different aspects of the technology itself. This is a kind of a brief summary, and I won't go through it in great length of some of the people that we've interacted with across different countries, across different points of care, across different type of disease, trauma, or problems. So you can see that we've been in quite a few countries, and there's a lot of very, very positive feedback, so to speak, that has been received in terms of clinical validation and the work that we've done at that level. One of the aspects that's very important, and maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit, is how I got into this particular industry. And one of the things that was very important to me was that I wanted to make this affordable, as affordable as possible. And as you grow a company, there's a lot of challenges, obviously, in that regard. This is a very advanced architecture, yet we wanted to also look at what was being offered in the marketplace. And when you look at some of the other assistive technology that are out there, which eventually have several points of failure for those patients, they are usually very, very expensive. So we wanted to try to bring our work in a format that somehow would be affordable. So our products start at $1,000 all the way to $10,000. And we really kind of grew from an assistive technology interest really to an ecosystem today. So we are across many points of care. We also have now algorithms for mental states, for instance. So we've done some very interesting clinical work at that level with autism, for instance. So in a way, we still remain very much a communication platform. However, because we are monitoring the brain, we are now able to provide some other insights as to what's happening with those patients. Here you can see that we've also participated and collaborated with several universities. McGill is just one of them in Montreal, and we've done some extraordinary work in deep learning, so very high accuracy and very, very interesting development in AI that is integrated or is being integrated in our systems. In terms of where we're at today, we've definitely achieved B2C, so directly to consumers, B2B with hospitals. We have a very strong IP portfolio. We have deployed in many places around the world. We are working with government agencies, trying to bring also our work in environments where there might be some governmental support. Not true in all jurisdictions, but there are some out there that are willing to help as a resident, in terms of assistive devices programs. We also have an interest in the military side of it. Veterans have been subject to trauma and various neurodegenerative disorders, usually even more than the general population. So this is something that we're interested in as well. And we've received quite a few interests also from other industries. So the company is extremely focused and has always been focused on healthcare. This is why we exist. This is the core philosophy of the firm. But fundamentally, we know that the technology that we've developed non-invasively could be used in other industries. And ultimately, we're working towards globalizing the work that we've done. We think it's very, very important. We're all quote unquote human beings, and there are some key fundamentals from a neuroscience perspective that apply to all of us. It doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter where you're coming from, how much money you have, or whatever it is. Those accidents, those disorders, those diseases can happen to any of us, and this is very, very important. And definitely something that I want to bring to light is that fundamentally I want to try to make this affordable and available all over the world. Ultimately, based on what we've done as well, there may be some interest, as mentioned, maybe in other industries, or maybe some other healthcare applications that can be done at that level, and we're certainly willing to talk to parties interested in us. To give you a little bit of kind of a competitive analysis as to what's happening out there, you can see some of the classic work that has been done by companies that are unimodal, that usually have one particular aspect of their technology that are applicable to certain patients. Those companies usually will fail after a certain point in time, either because of the pathophysiology itself or because of other conditions that are affecting the way they work. On our end, it doesn't affect us so far. And you can see on the other side, companies like Neuralink by Elon Musk, who have much less patients at this point in time, that are fundamentally more expensive than we are, and are also invasive technology. So, as I say, it's up to you at the end of the day if you want to have something, a foreign object inside of your brain or not. And maybe we'll talk more about that after this deck. But I have some strong opinion at that level, I would say, and as long as we can provide non-invasive approaches, I think this is the safer way of doing it. In terms of our team, we are a 3-member founding team. I myself have been in technology all my life, or enterprise technology or biotechnology all my life. Abhinav Kumar was co-founder in the techno side of it, so he's also a full stack developer, expert in BCI, CI, UX, UI robotics, and Neurotech. He is a graduate of IIT Bombay, which is the MIT of India. And Pascal, who shares my last name, is my brother, but he was also director, VP EMEA, and VP Global of a very large medical devices company. So it's great to have those two other individuals as part of my team. This is my board, both advisors and directors, investors in the firm, incredible individuals, truly, with a wide background, MDs, PhDs in neuroscience, in clinical psychiatry, neurology, cardiovascular medicine, and more. I'm truly honored to have those people, in my circles and powering and supporting our efforts. They are truly indispensable to the growth of this firm. In terms of the Neurotech, as you mentioned earlier, it really is a growing industry. It's emerging, but it's growing more and more. I think Elon Musk has contributed heavily to the discovery, so to speak, of this industry. But really, when you look at it, there's companies such as IBM or Microsoft or Meta or Samsung that have also come in and have filed patent applications. So it's even if they don't publicize it, so to speak, there's a lot of interest that's happening in Neurotech today. On our end, we have done quite a bit of work in North America, the Middle East. We are opening Latin America, so this is something I'm going to be announcing very, very shortly officially. We have multiple patents. We have a strong interest to launch in the UK and the Commonwealth and in Asia. We've received also another FDA clearance on our end for the NUOS architecture, and fundamentally we're keeping on doing our work. something that's truly rewarding when we can help individuals that don't have any other solution. So this is what makes me really truly excited, and this is really just the beginning of the journey, although it's been on my end 9 years in the making. One of the things that excuse me, is happening as well is we're currently raising some money to accelerate our work. We are looking for 5 to 10 strategic investors at this point in time, globally located. So again, I'm very, very interested in bringing this technology at a global level. So I'm quite particular in terms of the investors that would come in. It's not just about the money, it's about the networks, about access to clinicians and more. So something that I want to note here as well. And then in summary, we are truly expanding our work and our leadership in surgery-free neurotech, and we're seeking partners, like key partners that can help us grow this firm. We are also really very much oriented towards providing affordable solutions. We've done well over 100 life-changing deliveries now globally across different pathophysiologies, from children, teens, and adults and elderly. So this is something that we really can show and demonstrate. And from a business perspective, we've developed a very interesting IP portfolio that's highly disruptive across multiple high growth industries, and that's something that might be of interest to some of the parties. So this is kind of a very quick summary of where Neuro is at today, and I hope it informs you a little bit.
Thank you. Thanks, Francois. Thank you so much. That was really remarkable. And thank you so much for your insights. It's really exciting to see what the NUOS platform is doing. And of course, the release of the pad is going to be very exciting. So let's jump in to both some questions which I have, and I can see there's a few that people have posted already. So you talked about your team. I mean, they look very impressive. What sort of qualities are you looking for when you put a team together?
So I think one of the aspects of Neurotech is that it is a multidisciplinary requirement, so to speak, to build a firm like this. At the beginning when I first started, people were like, Francois, I mean, you don't have a PhD in neuroscience. How can you do this, right? I had even had mentors saying, Francois, just forget about it. It's just not going to happen. And the reality is that it's not just about your degrees and so on, right? It is about how you look at the technology aspect, but it's also how you look at every other part of the equation, so to speak, right? So you need knowledge, advanced knowledge, in neuroscience, in medicine, in healthcare itself, in terms of healthcare management and procurement and so on. In technology, various part of technology for us, from hardware to sensors, to software, to algorithms, to AI, and so on. So the team that surrounds me is really individuals that have a lot of skills. In some cases, they go very deep in their area of expertise, but I think ultimately I'm looking for people that do have this kind of general multidisciplinary capability as we all interact with one another, and we can kind of fill up little holes here and there and bring all the pieces of the puzzle together.
So your R&D and your production, do you have one central facility, or how does that work?
No, so we actually started. It's a kind of an interesting story. I launched Neuro after a major accident that happened to me, actually. So my last firm was global. Actually, I had an enterprise firm, an enterprise tech firm that had very, very large clients all around the world, and unfortunately got into an accident where a car door, the hinge of a car door, amputated a part of my right hand. And in that process, I went through 7 reconstructive surgeries, 4 major infections, almost I think 8.5 months, give or take, of narcotics, which almost killed me. And I reached a state of akinetic mutism, where my body was no longer responding. I could barely breathe at the very end of it. I could barely communicate, what was happening with me. So this was kind of the beginning of my transformation in a way from an enterprise tech guy to a biotech, entrepreneur. And at the same time, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So it was kind of a double hit. And then also another impact that has always kind of stayed, within me a few years prior to all of that. My mother passed away from a brain surgery. The brain surgery was supposedly leading edge, and unfortunately, it did not go well at all. And my mother passed away from that. So really, when you take that event plus the two other ones that were kind of back to back, my life just got pushed into neuroscience and neurotech. And for me, it was kind of a normal progression. But the reality is, we started in Canada, and for about a year and a half, I worked by myself, and then ultimately I met Abhinav online. He was in India at the time, so another Commonwealth country, and we started working by Zoom, just like we are doing right now. And the funny thing is that we went through a lot of accelerators, as mentioned, both in Canada and in California and Silicon Valley. But Abhinav was remaining in India, and we worked literally pretty much every single day. I think for about 5 years before we actually met in person. So this is quite incredible, really, that we've built, we already built this company and just working by Zoom, like literally every day, sharing, code and architecture and so on, and doing it this way. And then Pascal, my brother, was going into an early retirement on his side after being a senior executive of some of the major medical devices manufacturers in the world. And then when I showed him the work that we were doing, he was like, "Okay, I'm coming back. I'm going to come in as well." So very much remote, from India to France to Canada, and then more now, obviously, because we are in the Middle East, we're in Latin America, and more. So there's a very much a remote aspect of the company, and obviously through COVID also, we were naturally able to work because we had done all of this remote architecture in our own operations prior to COVID as well. So that helped us a lot.
So do you feel you're sort of walking with destiny? It sounds like it from how you describe it.
Very much so. I've been an entrepreneur, 29, almost 30 years now. And I sometimes you have to look for signs, right? There's certain signs in your life. If you don't pay attention to them, there's a way that eventually you'll understand. And for me, it was very, very clear that I needed to bring all the work that I had done in enterprise tech and all the things that I had built in the past into biotech. And even if I was not per se at the origin, a healthcare specialist, luckily I managed to learn quite fast, and here we are.
Clearly. So looking at your company, I mean, there was a very interesting slide which had seed financing and it had Series A. So where exactly are you at in that journey?
So this is, one of the interesting part of the firm. When you look at, I think today actually it was announced that Neuralink had done one more round. So Elon Musk managed to, get a valuation close to $5 billion, right? Which is incredible, really. We're nowhere close to that, and the reality is we've raised so far $1 million actually. So we've done all of this work, and it was about $1 million, and you need a lot of skills, like I said. You need a lot of knowledge and a lot of work to get to where we're at and go further. So for us, right now we're still looking at a seed round. I think we're not quite completely ready for a Series A, or pretty close to it. But I think a seed round, based on the state of the market, based on the conservative aspect of it.
The major institutional investor that you probably need to take you to the next stage.
Right. So this is actually a very interesting angle because the pad now is something that corporate venture arms could be very, very interested in. That it is from a tech perspective, from a pharma perspective. I think there's a new angle to neuro, which maybe was not so obvious at the beginning, right? Because
Yes.
people knew us for the NUOS product, but the pad is really another major item. And I think maybe traditional VCs may understand that whole picture, but I think the corporate venture arm will certainly see the benefit of working with us.
So just looking at your sort of product range, some of which is still prototype as I understand it, I also saw on that slide that there is an FDA approval. So how does it, and you also have an awful lot of IP applications or grants or patents and so on, which is a very expensive process to build up that portfolio. So how do you divide your products between those just requiring intellectual property protection and those which would actually be FDA or similar, seek similar approvals? Because that's obviously two different categories, isn't it? As a medical device going through that process.
So so the IP, obviously the IP is one matter, right? And the regulatory space is another matter, obviously. So on the IP side, my first patent actually was the pad, was actually the main, like we have several patents on the pad, but the very first main patent that I wrote and that we got is actually the pad. That took a massive effort. I think we went through over 6 years of cross-examination with the USPTO. To give you an idea, we got a 20-year protection on our technology plus I think 810 days more. So the USPTO kind of went backwards in a way, said, sorry it took so long, but we're giving you more time now. But it's a huge effort to be able to go through this because the way examination works today is they're also helped by AI, so they give you a lot of content to counter your application. So there's a lot of work that is required, a lot of patience is required to go through all of the all of the cross-examination that happens in any patent filing. In terms of the regulatory space, so that's a different matter. We got cleared by Health Canada on our end with NUOS in 2019, and we also got our first original FDA clearance under a very specific program that is called the Expanded Access Program.
Right.
Now, Expanded Access means in the United States that there is no other medical devices or no other pharmaceutical product that can be to be shown effective for the type of conditions that you're treating or that you're applying for. So on our end, we were very fortunate to go through that particular clearance, to receive also multiple US IRB clearances for ethics and for safety. And then more recently, we've also had another clearance. So it's something that is very progressive. It takes a long time. That it's IPO, that's regulatory. You have to show, you have to demonstrate to reach a state. On our end, we've been deemed to be of no significant risk. Right, so this is very, very important as well, because when you compare it to invasive neurotechnology, right, you have all sorts of potential problems that can happen as soon as you enter into the body. For us, we stayed outside of the body, so there's a lot less danger, so to speak, from our approach.
I suppose, is it the sort of dichotomy between whether this is regarded as a sort of safe communication device or whether it's actually a medical device? And obviously, for mankind, they're both very, very important, but the real, investment is probably in the approved medical device category. Right?
So there is an evolution of the product. So for NUOS, it is now in its second generation. I will be announcing this year the third generation of NUOS. And we have 4 editions of NUOS right now in the second generation. In the third generation, we'll have between 5 to 7 products, and some of those will be medical devices for sure, as well as the pad. The pad will also be a medical device, right? Because it will be an ultra rapid scan of the human brain, and obviously that device, is is a lightweight fMRI alternative in some ways, but there's going to be some very important data that's going to be informing clinical management, right? So as you get classified, by the regulatory bodies, you either inform clinical management, sometimes you drive clinical management, and depending on the category of where the patient is at or the stage of the patient disease, you end up in different classifications. So this is something that we are going to kind of be splitting between a communication product and ultimately at some point in time, really look at more advanced classification based on some of the work that we're doing. Yes.
Right. So because of the sort of expedited access, I'm not sure that's the correct term. Does that mean you haven't had to go through full clinical trials?
So we've done a lot of clinical testing and implementations, right? So we've done over 100 implementations right now. Some of the key opinion leaders that have worked with us come from the largest hospitals, literally some of the key hospitals in the world. A lot of people want to see our clinical trials. This is one of the aspects. So as you know, because I know you're in the legal business on your end, sometimes you are not able to disclose your methodology before a patent is granted, depending on the jurisdictions in which you apply. So there's a lot of our work that we've done clinically that is not shown to anybody at this point in time, simply for the fact that some of our patents are still in PCT processing, so they're not fully completed. But once that is done, once they're fully granted, then we'll be releasing more and more data on our clinical validations. Yeah.
So are there any peer reviews of your product or your products?
So same idea, like if you go to neuro.world, you can actually see implementations of various patients from different hospitals. So you can see some of this work that's being done by key leaders clinically.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to share with you tonight, and it's the first time that I'm actually going to be speaking about it publicly, but we're going to be announcing it and hopefully showing some video of the work and so on. But I'm very excited about that particular development. Is that one of the largest hospitals in the world that deals with this type of patients was working with the youngest fully locked in stage 6 ELS within the United States. She's 17 years of age, has no communication capability. Her eyes are partially sutured. She has tracheostomy and so on. And unfortunately, this poor young lady has really truly been completely entrapped by her body. And that hospital in Chicago was unable to help her. She went to New York City to other hospitals. They could not help her. She consulted, and to my understanding, with an invasive neurotech firm, one of the largest of its kind that a lot of people know. That was not a possibility. And then they eventually called me up and they said, okay, Francois, we need your help. And this week, for the very first time, on the very first trial, this young lady was able to communicate, was able to play music, control music, and also control YouTube videos. All of that without calibration and strictly by thoughts, strictly by thinking. Right, so this is really truly groundbreaking for us, and truly amazing that this has been achieved. So I'll be verbalizing and announcing that more globally, I would say. But this is really, really important because imagine being 17 years of age and suddenly everything is taken away from you. Right? You don't have any more capability in terms of communicating with your parents and your loved ones and your friends, and your doctors and so on. So having achieved this, especially doing it on day one, is something that I do not believe any other firm has been able to do so far.
Yeah, that's a very amazing story. That's fantastic. Congratulations. And it's wonderful for the person who's been so helped like that. It must be a miracle for them. It's fantastic. So in terms of how the products are going to be disseminated and so on, I mean, are you thinking about that? What level of training does the person who's facilitating the patient to use these, what level do they need? And Is it if it's a relatively not very, does it have to be a medically qualified person, or could these devices potentially be much more accessible because perhaps the training level can be achieved quite quickly?
Yeah. So we've implemented patients over 10,000 kilometers away from ourselves via Zoom in less than 5 minutes, to give you an idea, right? So literally people on the other side of the world being able to actually use our technology. So it's really quite amazing when you do so. Like I've seen, patients that have been entrapped sometimes for 4 or 5 years have not been able to communicate with their loved ones at all and with their caregivers. People with, again, neurological diseases. I've one patient that had neurological disorder. She had ALS, then she had a traumatic brain injury and stroke, right? So she had 3 major neurological conditions, all in one person, right? Had no communications for, I think, 5 years, and we helped her literally within a few minutes. She was able to start triggering and activating her systems instantaneously. So that to me is major. So you don't need a lot of staff. You don't need, again, surgery of any kind. It's something that can be deployed remotely very, very quickly.
So how tied to language are the devices? They're tied to English, or how exactly does that work, of the back and forth of translating the brain functionality into language?
Yes. Yeah. So one thing that's very important is that we're not hacking your thoughts. We're not hacking your brain. That's something that people may misunderstand. What we're doing is we're multimodally listening to certain signals emitted by the brain. Okay, so those signals are very, 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 very small, very tiny electrical signals. Yet those signals are capable of certain signatures that help us interact with either a tablet, which was what's behind me, or a smartphone. And when you use those signals, you can start activating and triggering communication in various ways, depending on which user interface you're using within our architecture. So it's a very simple system. It's a very easy way to interact. And in terms of languages, you can make it any language that you want. You can have it cross-lingual and multilingual. So you could literally have something that you read in one particular language, but it speaks for you in another language, right? As we progress, and as you've seen more recently, the development, for instance, with ChatGPT, you can look at prediction. You can look at what is used most often, and so on. Right? So you can also verbalize things and predict things more easily in terms of communication. So there's a huge set of development from that perspective that can happen also to ease the communication regardless of the language.
So in terms of, obviously we hear the key functionality is to help people who can't communicate through brain issues and all sorts of things, but clearly this would also have application in performance enhancement, wouldn't it? And I just wonder if you've looked at that and thought about it, and also treatment potentially even of certain conditions like depression, for example, which wouldn't be the first time people have considered medical device type of treatment for depression and other illness like that.
That's right. So one of the aspects that is important in our technology is that we've developed, as I mentioned earlier, a set of algorithms that also look at what happens from a mental state standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. So we look at the brain activity, but we also can understand what cognitive performance looks like. We can also understand, for instance, the level of calmness or the level of anxiety or PTSD that you're experiencing. We can also look at the level of appreciation that you're experiencing. So very recently I announced that via a collaboration with the world's largest rehab facility in Dubai, and the largest center for autism, actually, is they started using those algorithms to determine the level of appreciation and the mental response, if you wish, for children versus therapists or versus teachers, right? So it was very, very interesting for us to see that sometime some of those children, for instance, would respond in a better way with an adult that actually came from the same region and had the same accent, for instance, than just another therapist or another teacher, right? So you would think that this is something that we take for granted, but now we have factual data and actual, trackable information that can tell you, hey, you know what, this autistic child is actually responding better with that type of content or even with that type of individual versus another one, right?
Yeah.
So you can help the child learn better, you can improve the cognition, the performance that you're seeking. So this is another very, very interesting aspect of what we do, right? We focus on communication, but there's another set of interest that can be coming from the fact that we're just listening to what the brain is doing. I have other examples of, a gentleman, for instance, that had multiple brain surgeries, and his families didn't know what else to do because he had absolutely no focus, no attention. He could not, do anything from that perspective. And it's just amazing, to see the video of him absolutely commanding and controlling the music player that we have in NUOS, so the video content, YouTube content that we have in NUOS, just on demand. So you tell the gentleman, I want you to change to the next song, and boom, he was able to do that, right? And so there is a set of belief that this individual is no longer able to really have, straight thoughts, if you wish. And then we actually could demonstrate the opposite of that, that actually the person was absolutely able to engage and control content just by thoughts, right? So we're opening new doors, really. I mean, we think we're really just scratching the surface, really, because there's a lot more that technology can do, for sure.
Do you think obviously everything you talk about is wonderful and commendable. Do you think there's a dark side to this ability to read what's going on in brains? And what should we be thinking about that?
Yeah, you know what? It's not. So again, I want to reemphasize on the fact that we're not reading your thoughts.
No, I know, but I'm just talking in more general terms, really.
Yeah, from a general term, yeah. So from a general term, I mean, I think one of the aspects, and this is something that is coming to light more and more, I think is, when you have a technology that is associated with the brain, right? And now I'm going to talk about the invasive side of things. If you bring an object that is wireless or even wired, but especially the wireless side of things, can you hack it? Can you actually, can the technology be hacked? I'm not talking about the brain being hacked. I'm talking about the technology that's in the brain. Can that technology be hacked? And if so, then there's a huge problem there, right? I mean, you could go from capturing information to making even the device, overheat or explode. I mean, God knows what else you can do, right? I mean, there's a lot of potential problems that can happen, as soon as you are internal from that standpoint. When you're non-invasive like we are, I mean, you just take out the device and that's it, you're done, right? There's nothing else that can happen. So the reality, to my understanding, is the invasive providers have to be within a certain radius of an authorized surgical center to remove a device if there is a problem, if there's a significant issue. But again, at the end of it, could you hack a device like this, and could you make it do something that is potentially dangerous? I've been in enterprise tech too long in my life, I would say, almost, to say that at the end of the day, there are bad people out there, and if they want to find a way, it could be something that the invasive providers have to be very, very careful about. That's for sure.
Yeah, but it's just another interesting aspect to this, isn't it? Yeah. So let me go through some of the questions which people have posted. So yeah, this is actually from someone in Hong Kong. Prevention is better than cure. People of my age, I know this gentleman, I think he's in his 60s. I'm more interested to hear about you on the subject of how to prevent dementia. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so the pad so the pad and NUOS really can actually play a role in terms of dementia. One of the aspects of it that I sometimes explain to my patients is that you can train your brain in a way to act almost like a muscle, right? I mean, if when you lift weight, your body is stronger, is faster, and so on, right? So the brain is obviously not a muscle, but if you actually start using your brain like you've never done before, and you use your brain, in the methodology that we have, it's absolutely amazing what happens, from that perspective, right? So the reality is you can help your brain from that perspective in really new ways, I would say. And I think, I don't want to do any claims from that perspective, but neuroplasticity, for instance, is one example where you suddenly start rewiring your brain in new ways that you had never done before, right? So I've had a lot of talk with neurologists from that perspective, looking at what can be done, what can be achieved, or how it can be potentially monitored. Depression, you mentioned depression. I had other neurologists telling me that some of their patients literally died of depression, right? They just gave up on life.
Yes.
When you have that capability of interacting with the world again, this gives you the will, this gives you the power, to interact with your loved ones and live longer, right? So the quality of life that you're getting, the interaction that you're getting, the way you're working with your brain is potentially helping you also facing mental state problems or potential disorders that can be established over time. In terms of the pad, I had people telling me, why would you build the pad? There's no pill for Alzheimer or for dementia. What are you doing? This was, a few years back. And my thought on that was, what? Right now, and I've lived it through my own dad, through my own father. He lived in France, over 6 years. He went through a mental analysis, so to speak, in different hospitals that were very much manual, right? There's a lot of paperwork trying to test, memory and so on, but it was a very manual process. And you would think that in France, and most of the westernized world, I would say, there is easy access to technology that can
Yeah,
give you.
especially France. Yes.
And that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case at all, right? So the reality is the earliest you can understand what's happening with your brain, okay, the sooner you can make decisions, the sooner you can also talk, factually with doctors about what's happening with yourselves. And now that the big pharmas are starting to enter, into that space with early therapies to slow down the disease. So it's not a magic pill that takes away, Alzheimer's or dementia, but just trying to slow down the processes. Now you have a tool outside of an fMRI or a PET scanner that can be at your general doctor, at your general practitioner, locally in your town, in your city, in your village, even. Like very much local to where you are, and you can learn and see what's happening with yourself. And eventually, when the therapies are becoming more and more available, how those therapies are working for you, right? So that's something that's very important. And then, as I said earlier, the big pharmas themselves can look at it from their angle and try to accelerate research and development, and fine tune their products to make sure that it's safe and fundamentally can help those individuals in need, right? So this is
pad comes
very
out, is it
important.
going to be generally available, Francois? How do you get it?
I just before this, I can share that for the very first time last week, I actually saw the first iteration, the first physical iteration of the pad in its very, very early shape, so to speak. It's nowhere close to be finished, but the actual product, so to speak, that came from my original writing and the patterns that we've established. So it will take still a little while. It will take a little while, and like I said, funding will help us to accelerate that and bring the pad, to as many people as possible.
So I'll just go through a few more comments, and quite interesting, some of these. I'm from McGill. I wish I'd met you guys there. Will you do university visits in Canada? So just mentioning that from somebody.
Yeah, Absolutely. So anybody in Canada, I mean, like I was saying earlier, I do travel a lot. COVID was a bit of an interruption, but I can meet anybody in Canada. That's not an issue.
think this is
Or
from
anywhere else in the
somebody.
world, really. I mean, we represented Canada at Arabelf in Dubai this year. We're part of the Canada delegation, Ontario delegation, and I'm more than willing to to meet with anybody that has interest in our technologies.
So it's another one. Are you looking for PhDs to join your team? I'm based in Toronto, but I would love to join. I think there's no need to answer that now, but you can think about that. Do you
Thank you. You can yeah, you can go to neuro.world, and there's a contact form there. You can send me your resume. You can also contact me on LinkedIn via my name as well. And yeah, feel free to reach out.
right? Another one. Do you plan to commercialize it? Well, I think the answer is yes, but like normal AI headphones? Question mark. Yeah.
So so NUOS is commercialized. We are post-revenue in terms of NUOS. The pad will absolutely be commercialized as soon as it's ready. And one of the aspects, again, what's very important for me is to make things affordable. So having a rapid scan done by the pad helmet and analyzed through our deep learning is something that will take hopefully less than 20-30 minutes maximum, I would say. And it will hopefully be supported by the each government, and be as affordable as possible. I would love to see the pad in literally every city, every town around the world at a very low price per scan, so people get to know, pharma get to know what's happening with all of our brains. And again, just I want to say something at that level in a second, but in terms of privacy, but really to treat the disease, to treat the problem, because anybody in that world will tell you that Alzheimer's and dementia is the next pandemic. It is going to affect the health system in ways that are just going to be incredible. So it's very, very important to work on this. One thing I want to add in terms of, having that type of information, the way we work right now and the way the pad will work is that it is numbers, numerical data information that is encrypted and that has absolutely zero information about you, from you as a person, right? So even if, let's say, a hacker was able to crack through the encryption process, okay, fundamentally they will just get numbers, like a very large number, a very large set of numbers, but that means nothing. It means absolutely nothing to just having numbers after numbers after numbers. There's
Well, I
no
suppose, but if the Brits manage to crack the Enigma code, you never know.
Yeah, but I mean, again, there's no patient information that would be related to that, right? And at the end of the day, a session again of 20 minutes worth of data is not going to give you anything, right?
Yeah, I
You
mean, that's
need to
very
understand
along
why
the
that it is.
lines. Francois, I have a question here, which I'll just read out to you, but I think you pretty much answered it. With great power comes great responsibility. So how safe is all the data in Google Cloud? Does the device control how much of the signal's data it's capturing, or can it just randomly download all the data from it? How can a patient know about all this as they're already not in a state with the capacity to sue? That's a very intelligent
Yeah,
question comment
yeah,
somebody's made, I think.
yeah, absolutely. So, one of the aspects, especially in Europe, with GDPR, but I mean, there's other aspects of it. And one of the aspects is what I wrote in our technology originally and in our patent is that data and the results of that data is not only forwarded to the clinician, but it's also forwarded to the patient as well at the very same time. And if for whatever reason the patient would want to, delete and get out of, that analysis, then they can do it instantaneously, right? So this is something very important. That's also part of the technology and the technology architecture, is that the patient is in control actually of what that data is going to do. Right? So this is a very, very important aspect of it.
Thank you. Thank you. And someone's just made the comment, many thanks for the inspiring presentation, optimistic start to the day. Obviously, they're in Asia. So I think we're almost at the end of an hour and the time has absolutely flown, Francois. So tell me, where do you see Neuro and yourself in 5 years' time in a perfect world?
The perfect world. Well, I think ultimately the work that we are doing with NUOS is not only key for some children, teenagers and adults and elderly at this point in time. We've already experienced this today, over the past several years. So this is one part of the company that hopefully is going to keep on growing with more and more features, more and more tools, for those patients. I have, for about a year and a half right now, another NUOS edition that is in clinical testing, clinical trialing, that we have not announced yet. And that particular edition of our technology is really going to revolutionize a certain aspect of healthcare. And it has nothing to do per se with what we're doing right now, but it's another aspect of healthcare that really is going to help a very, very, very large problem as well. So this is something I'm really excited about. I will be announcing the beginning of that very soon. So I think that part of the NUOS ecosystem, so to speak, is going to keep on growing and hopefully giving to the world some incredible results.
Thank you.
The pad is next. Yeah, the pad is after that is for us to really tackle Alzheimer's and neurological disorders via this technology, which, as I said, is an affordable and an alternative and more rapid deployment architecture than the classic fMRI, especially if you don't have one in where you live, where you're located.
Well, thank you so much, Francois. Well, I just wish we had some more time, and thank you for such a great conversation and for sharing so many insights about yourself, your company, and this fascinating industry about neurotech. Obviously, we don't know much about it, and it's going to be so important to our futures. So we really wish you the best in terms of more breakthroughs and also financing and funding, and hope that we can maybe reconnect in a year or so from now and see how you're doing. So that brings us to the end of this webinar, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to everybody who's joined us, listening in, and we hope you got some valuable insights. So thank you again, Francois, and wonderful to see you all. Look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Have a great day or a lovely evening wherever you are. Bye. Bye.